If there's one thing Minnesotans will gladly talk about, it's the weather. This is more than just a cliche safe subject to talk about. We really get into talking about our weather, because our weather events are some of the most extreme in the nation. And just as much as we love to talk about the weather, we love to be out in it. Minnesotans as a whole are hardcore outdoor enthusiasts. This is Min Central Currents. I'm your host, Teresa Meese. With this episode airing during Severe Weather Awareness Week in Minnesota, we wanted to ask, what does the intersection of weather, the great outdoors, and climate change look like? Our first guest is a community member who loves to spend time in the great Minnesota outdoors year-round.
Okay, I am Bruce Busta, although my nickname is Harv. Most people call me Harv. Let's see, I am retired accounting faculty at St. Cloud State University, and I now work on a part-time basis in an MBA program in Madrid, Spain. I do teach a bit about sustainability accounting. Okay, so I've had an interest in the climate and reporting on it, both from a corporate perspective for quite a long time. I do a lot of things outdoors. So I'm an avid cyclist, Nordic skier. I do rowing, and we do a lot of hiking. My wife and I do a lot of hiking. Let me first talk about Nordic skiing. So here in central Minnesota, historically, we would reliably have snow in late November, for sure by early December. And, the ski season would really begin then. And then, it would really go till early or mid-March. So it basically was a 4-month season. This year was a very short season. We didn't really get skiable snow till December 30th, and we're done by February 28th. So really, instead, it's just a 2-month season. So, in terms of this great outdoor sport that I love so much, our season was basically cut in half.
In typical topsy-turvy 2020 style, we did get snowfall on October 16th, but that melted, and we didn't get any more snow until very late in December. So
one thing we're seeing here is that we're seeing a lot more snowmaking. In Minneapolis, I think there's 3 to 4 venues that now make snow. There's one in Winona. In St. Cloud, we make snow. We make snow over in Sartell. And even, believe it or not, even in Duluth, they have a major snowmaking venue. And I have very mixed feelings about that because it's obviously extends the season back to its normal conditions, about usually 3.5, 4 months. But the process of making snow isn't exactly carbon friendly. And in many ways, we're going backwards. But anyways, that's kind of the situation with the Nordic skiing.
And it isn't just Nordic skiing that's impacted when we don't get a full season of snowfall. Downhill skiing, snowshoeing, snowmobiling, sledding. So many things that Minnesotans love to do in the winter, and the industries that support them rely on a full season of snow. And this didn't just impact the southern half of the state. Places north of us weren't getting their normal snow seasons either.
No, not at all. We have a kind of a sophisticated reporting system to figure out where the snow is. And, there was no skiing even up in the Grand Rapids area until December this year. So even on the North Shore, up by Tofty and so on, where they usually have very reliable snow. One of the places that have the most reliable snow is in Hayward, Wisconsin, where we have the largest Nordic ski race in the United States, the Birkebeiner. And that race has been shortened a couple times. And actually, I don't know if it's been canceled, but certainly it's been shortened a couple times because of the warmer weather in the last few years. So that's, pretty big change compared to what it was in the 70s and 80s. Here in Minnesota, our biggest Nordic ski race is the Vasaloppet, and that is in Mora, Minnesota. It happens around Valentine's Day. These races are usually about 30 miles long. Okay. And historically, that was a point-to-point race. So you'd start in one city and go to the next. And that's really fun, to do that kind of thing. And you feel like you've accomplished something when you go from one city to the next on your skis. But because of the unpredictable nature of the snowfall now, they now do basically a loop, okay? And so they make snow somewhere between 6 and a 10-mile loop. And then you start in Mora, downtown on the main street, and you ski out onto the lake, and then you do a loop it depends on the weather and what they've been able to put together, 1 or 2 or 3 laps on this fairly large man-made snow loop between 6 and 10 miles long, and then that becomes the race. Just as a side note, obviously it's very expensive and time consuming to make snow like this, a big loop like that. And what they do in Mora is quite clever. They make a giant pile of snow. So imagine a pile of snow they make with a snowmaking machine about 3 stories tall. And then they, with loaders, put it in a manure spreader and go down the trail and drop the snow. And believe it or not, with persistence, you can make a pretty good snow loop with that.
There is something to be said for ingenuity when dealing with adversity. But what has been lost when the snow simply doesn't fall from the sky? A ski trail from city to city takes you past constantly changing scenery. It gets you really out in the outdoors. And it engages both towns in one big event together. A repetitive loop? It can frankly get a bit dull. It
does. I mean, we struggle to get more people interested in the sport because it's just more work than it used to be. Like I said, the upsides are great. You have a great way to stay fit outside and socially distance. And like I said, it's a sport that you can do at all levels. I mean, like I said, elderly people can do it, young people, beginners. There's different techniques, so you can have quite a bit of variety. It's one of the more popular high school sports now in the winter. One of the reasons it's very popular in high school is that there are no cuts. Unlike basketball or hockey, only a certain number of people get to play, and sometimes that whether you play or not is kind of subjective based on the coach's decisions. Where in Nordic skiing, you just say line up and go. And you can have 80 people on a team. It's no problem. It's even more fun. So it's become a very popular high school sport, but the season has become shortened.
And it turns out it's not just winter outdoor activities that are impacted by low snowfall seasons.
We live on a lake here, and one of the things that happens is when you have a low snow year, the ice tends to be a lot more transparent and more light comes into the lake. And as a consequence, you have much higher weed growth, even in the deep parts of the lake. So we live in a pretty clear lake. And this year, it was terrific ice skating in December, right? Because there was no snow and the ice was perfectly clear. But what will happen this summer is what I would expect is about early August, there will be pretty significant weed growth, even in water that's 25 to 30 feet deep. And the reason for that is that the weeds never properly died, or they have a real jump because of the lack of snow depth. Years when we have heavy snow depth in the longer season, and those weeds get stunted pretty well, and they also get a late start. So it makes a fairly big difference. So I mean that diminishes your recreation in the summer for all water sports, whether it be swimming or rowing or water skiing or fishing. It's just problematic.
The changing weather patterns in Minnesota are also affecting one of the outdoor activities you'd least expect: hiking.
We do a lot of hiking. My wife and I have actually walked the Community Santiago across northern Spain, which is about a month-long hike and amazing thing to do. But here in Minnesota, we have tremendous hiking, especially the Superior Hiking Trail up north. And one of the problems we're having with the climate change is that we have high winds, we have more erosion, okay, and we have these snowfalls that are at much warmer temps than we used to. So you have heavy snow, a lot of heavy snow. The consequence of all three of these is that you have more downfall on the trail. Okay. And so I don't know if you're aware of it, but when you have these trails, you can only really clear them by hand. Only the most experienced people use chainsaws. They all volunteers, they prohibit chainsaws because one, they're unless you know what you're really doing, they're dangerous. You can get hurt pretty bad, something fall on you or whatever. And then you're a long way from help on the trail. So you can imagine going on these trails, and it's kind of fun. You go out there with these giant buck saws that two people use, like you see in the old pictures, and clear the trail with these things. And, it's interesting, but it takes a lot more volunteers. And keeping the trail clear can be a pretty substantial task now with climate change. Thankfully, you only need an 18-inch wide trail. When you have a big downfall with these big trees, it can take a full day to clear even 50 feet of trail.
I'd like to thank Harv for sharing with our audience what he has witnessed firsthand and how Minnesota's changing weather patterns have impacted our access to the outdoors we so love. My next guest joins us to talk more about the science behind severe weather.
My name is Rachel Humphrey, and I'm an assistant professor of meteorology and science education at St. Cloud State University. My formal training is in elementary education, sociology, and atmospheric science. Unlike a lot of my peers in the field of meteorology, I did not come out of the womb holding an anemometer. I actually didn't really care about the weather at all unless it meant a snow day.
So what did get you interested in studying weather?
I didn't really become super interested in the weather and specifically severe weather until I was about 15 years old. I was camping with my mother up in the Adirondacks of upstate New York. We had two dogs. One was a little puppy at the time. And on one July morning, our little puppy started growling ferociously at something. And we thought, oh, is there a bear outside? Is there, what? It was super, super early in the morning. The sunlight was just coming up, and we opened the tent door, not really knowing what to expect. But what we didn't expect was seeing these gigantic clouds just kind of hanging down like giant pouches, illuminated in a color that I can only describe as, hell-like. I mean, it was red. It was, and I was just like, we're going to die, aren't we? It was terrifying because, we were camping in an area that had no warnings. This is way before, I'm dating myself, but this is way before the internet, right? This is way before this cell phones, anything. It was wilderness, so we didn't have a ranger coming around saying, hey, batten down the hatches. And because of that, we were caught very much unaware of that situation. And it was terrifying. So there were two humans, whatever, my mom and I, and our two dogs in our tent cowering, and our tent got rolled. So that was, that's pretty significant winds and stuff like that. And then we started hearing trees snapping all around us. And that's not a place that you want to be in when you have no shelter and no warning and no way of getting out, because we had hiked in. And, we survived, but it took us a long time to hike out because it was a severe blowdown and everything was just kind of it was bad. So when we did finally get out, there were emergency vehicles all over the place, whatever. It turns out that there had been some campers who had been killed because they got flattened by the tree and stuff like that. And I will fully admit that I was traumatized by that experience, and I was scared for a long time. And after I stopped being scared, I started saying, well, wait a minute, hold on. What caused that? Right? And so, how if you know more information about something that's scary, it becomes less scary. I think that was my way of kind of cocooning myself in, swaddling myself with knowledge. And so that was really what set me on the path of wondering what the heck was behind severe weather. And it turns out that it was a gigantic thunderstorm complex called a derecho, which had blown through the area. And the area where we had been camping had experienced that, several times throughout its history, and it's experienced it since. And we actually had a big blowdown here in Minnesota years ago as well. And it was a similar kind of storm system.
Well, that is one heck of a way to get introduced to your calling in life. You did mention that you were camping in the Adirondacks. So I suppose, full disclosure for our audience, you're not originally from Minnesota.
I'm a New Yorker at heart, and raised in New York. And then I lived in Colorado for about a decade. And then I moved out here in 2016. So this is my 5th year here. And y'all don't mess around with your winters. Oh my gosh. I was not prepared. That first winter, I was like, I'm going to die here. This is people. What do you mean it's minus 35? What is that?
And you hadn't even experienced 2019 yet.
No, I had not. By 2019, I had embraced the fact that you could actually do things outside in the cold, like throwing the hot water off of your balcony and freezing the spaghetti, that was kind of cool. And I was like, oh, this is how people survive. They do experiments and they do science. So, yeah.
Yes, that is in fact how we keep ourselves from going insane in the winter. So now that you've been able to experience the weather extremes in Minnesota, what are your thoughts on the weather that we have here?
Yeah, so it's very interesting with Minnesota specifically. That first winter that I moved out here, when I thought I'm going to wake up frozen as a fish stick in my apartment, right? I was told by everybody, that was a mild winter. And I was like, what? Because apparently it gets pretty cold here in the winter, and it has for a long, long time. But when I started asking questions, because again, that's what I do when I want to find out more, I started asking questions and people were saying, yeah, this used to be quite frequent, right? Now we're having a cold spell, but it used to be more frequent. They're not happening as much. Now, again, you can't attribute a single season to anything, larger scale, but I do remember being told quite frequently, oh yeah, that's nothing compared to what it used to be. So I always found that to be pretty interesting. And in terms of severe weather, like tornadoes.
Hey, this is a host break-in. We actually did discuss tornadoes quite a bit in the context of the movie Twister, because Rachel was a storm chaser for 10 years. But that conversation got a little off the rails, so I left it on the cutting room floor. But I wanted to make sure that everybody knew she knows what she's talking about when it comes to tornadoes. Okay, back to the interview.
If you take a look at a map of Tornado Alley, which is where, climatologically speaking, most of the tornadoes happen in the country, Minnesota is part of it. Right? We have the extreme southwestern portion of Minnesota just creeps on in there. So tornadoes are not unheard of in this area. I think that one of the reasons why it seems, because I know a lot of my students are always like, oh, we're getting an uptick in tornado activity in Minnesota. And it's just kind of like, well, is that really happening, or is our technology just better? And are there more spotters? Which, don't get me wrong, we need spotters. Spotters are vitally important, right? But if there are more eyes on the skies, then yes, the frequency of reports and stuff like that is going to go up naturally as well. But that also brings hazards with it too, because if you have more eyes on the skies, you have more eyes in the path of the hazard potentially.
So I've noticed in my 40 years of lived experience that it seems like weather events we're having have gotten more intense. Like the cold snaps are really cold and they last longer. And when we get a rainy spell, it rains hard and more often.
It's interesting because when you take a look at climatological history, right? So we say that when you're analyzing something on a climate scale, you need at least 30 years of data, right? Well, 2020, right, started a new 30-year period. And so if you look at what is considered climatologically normal, or not, so we don't use the word normal, right? We use averages. But if you look at the averages are ticking up for certain things, like, for example, temperature, right? So temperature on a global scale, not everywhere, but on a global average scale, the average is up now. Right, the average is increased, and so we have that new average from which to base our observations. When we talk about anomalies, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about just departures from an average value, and so our average values are just now ticked up a little bit. And there are certain areas of the country where precipitation is doing the same thing. And also the frequency of extreme precipitation events, not just the amount of precipitation that happens within the events, but the frequency of those events, that is also up, ticking upward. But again, that is not the same. It's not the same everywhere, right? So, for example, in areas where there haven't been severe precipitation events, a lot of times there are drought events, right? So it seems like we can't reach this kind of happy medium, anywhere. And so, yeah, it's fascinating because as more, like I said, as more and more data comes in, the more you're just like, wow, okay, things are changing, and we're not just misremembering things. Like I always used to say, when I was a kiddo, like the snow drifts used to come up to my, my chest or my neck or whatever. And I was like, yeah, but I was also so much shorter then, right? So, but yeah, it's very interesting to actually dig into the data, which I wish I had more time to do that, just in an everyday kind of thing. I'm a meteorologist, so I work on a much smaller time scale. I consider anything out past 3 days to be wishful thinking. But when it comes to looking at climate changes, the models that are run that extrapolate out, okay, this is what we expect the temperatures to do. They take in lots of different variations and stuff like that. So just because I say that I'm a meteorologist doesn't mean that I don't believe in climate models, because no, they're two totally different things, but it's just as valid. So.
Well, as we're getting into storm season here, can you talk a bit about the effects of these more powerful rain events that we've been having?
So one of the things that we have to remember when we're talking about flooding, right, is that flooding is a state in which the ground cannot absorb the excess rainfall. So it has to go somewhere, right? So if it can't be contained within the banks of a river, guess what? The river overflows. Or if it can't be infiltrating down into the soil because the soil has been covered by asphalt or concrete, guess what? It's going to run off of that, right? So what's interesting about flooding events, especially in urban areas, is that as things like detergents and other pollutants and things like that are laid down on dry concrete or asphalt, it only takes one flooding event to kind of reactivate that. Right. And then that water goes somewhere, right? It all flows somewhere. And so it can have huge impacts depending on what is in that water. And yeah, where that water is going. It can have huge impacts on water quality all over, not just in Minnesota, of course, but that's pretty much anywhere. And of course, if you have rapidly flowing rivers, that can also increase the amount of erosion and stuff like that too. So yeah, lots of downstream effects. Sorry, no pun intended. I mean, I guess you could say that meteorology is to blame for the water that comes out of the sky, right? I mean, the meteor...
Everybody likes to.
The meteors that we study are not coming from the sky. I mean, not coming from outer space. They are hydrometeors, right? So water-based stuff falling out of the sky. So especially here in our department, one of the courses that we offer looks at natural hazards and how humans respond to them. And so our biggest thing for that class is, if it's flooding, be safe, right? So don't drive into water-covered roads because what's under the road might not be there, right? And your car doesn't float, right? So we have a really cute song that we play in one of the classes, and it's basically turn around, don't drown, your car is not a boat, right? So, and there's more messaging going out from like the National Weather Service and all sorts of water conservation agencies that try to bring that point home, because for whatever reason, humans are gonna human, and they tend to, if you see flooding, a lot of people tend to just go down and want to see it, right? And get up close and personal because sure, it's an element and you want to, okay, cool. But you can be caught unawares very, very quickly, and you can find yourself in a very bad place. So for us, in terms of mitigating the effects of flooding, it's being aware of the risks of flooding and also being aware of the conditions that can lead to flooding, right? So for example, if you are living in an area where you've had rain for days and days and days at a time, and there's, forecast to be a huge rainstorm coming through or a huge system coming through, your area might flood, right? Because your soil can only hold so much. Or if your ground is frozen, right? Sometimes freezes here, or so I've experienced, once or twice, right? Well, if you get a big rainstorm and your ground is still frozen, it's not going to infiltrate, right? So again, knowing what conditions lead to and exacerbate flooding is really, really important. And of course, the forecasts are getting better and better. They are getting better and better for those kinds of events. And so the Storm Prediction Center, for example, will, which is a national agency that puts out outlooks and stuff like that for the entire country, they will put out outlooks for excessive rainfall forecasts now, which is good. I mean, that's important, right? Everybody thinks of tornadoes and hurricanes and, all this other stuff as severe weather, but yeah, flooding kills many, many people in a given year, right? It's actually the number one weather-related cause of death in the country. Before I moved here, I was living out in Colorado, and there are all sorts of canyons out there that get flooded out every single year, and some people unfortunately have died in the past because they don't realize that a thunderstorm that's happening 12 miles away can be dropping water that will eventually make its way down to the canyon, and they won't have time to escape. So again, just getting the messaging out early that, hey, conditions are favorable for thunderstorms to occur in this area. If it can dissuade some people from going into those canyons, then, that's a good thing. So again, it's all about messaging and looking at the conditions beforehand.
It seems like it should be obvious, but now that I'm listening to you, it's amazing how much the job of a meteorologist kind of falls under the heading of public safety.
Yeah, it's funny because more and more what we're finding is that meteorology is becoming more of a, going hand in hand with emergency management, right? Because if you want to be able to keep people safe in your community, you have to know what's going on with the weather, right? And so we have a lot of our students here in meteorology. We are a lot of them are becoming more and more interested with working with, for example, the Hennepin County emergency management agencies and stuff like that, because again, they go hand in hand. And it's interesting because especially now that we're in severe weather season, a lot of times the only time that you hear of meteorologists interacting with the public in terms of mitigation ahead of time is when you hear these horror stories of, oh no, it is a golf tournament that I'm watching on TV, and this bozo on TV is cutting in with a severe weather alert, right? Well, the bozo on TV, and I'm using air quotes here, but the bozo on TV isn't doing that to interrupt your viewing, right? To interrupt your plans. It's literally to say, hey, be aware, right? Take a survey of your surroundings. They're not doing it to inconvenience you, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, a lot of the messaging associated with meteorology is keeping people safe. That is at our heart, I would say that is why we do what we do. I know that for me, that's why I do it.
Well, I remember many years ago reading about the children's blizzard. I'll put a link to information about this in the show notes for our listeners. Suffice it to say, it was a very tragic blizzard event that happened long before we had our wonderful modern alert systems and weather prediction capabilities. And things like that, looking back into history and reading about those sorts of events really does make you appreciate the modern technology we have helping us look out for these storms ahead of their impact.
But absolutely. I mean, that is a perfect example right there, right? And events like the children's blizzard and the the Armistice Day blizzard and all of these things, they have sparked changes in how communication occurs. Right now, obviously, they didn't have the technology that we have today, right? So social media was, quite limited
Yes.
in terms of how quickly word could spread. But after the Armistice Day blizzard, we had a 24/7 National Weather Bureau, right? That didn't exist before then, right? And so, yeah, it's at its foundation, I mean, meteorology is, yes, it's the study of what comes out of the sky, but there's a lot of sociology behind that, and psychology too, right? Because it's always fascinating to, well, meet people who want to go out and experience the severe weather, right? I mean, evolution should tell us, go the other way, right? But there are those of us who are just like, yeah, no, I'm going to go up onto the roof. And, I'm not advocating that people do that, but, it's part of our human nature is also like, oh, I want to experience that, right? Or why people choose, assuming that they have the ability to leave an area, right, in the face of a hurricane or something like that, why do they choose to stay behind, right? So yeah, it's the psychology and the sociology of weather is fascinating as well. So.
Well, it's been an absolute joy to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about this topic that's so important to our ability to get out and enjoy the outdoors safely. Do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave us with today?
I can't really think of anything other than keep asking questions, and that goes to you, but also to your audience as well, because asking questions is how we learn, and knowledge is meant to be shared. So, yeah.
Thank you once again to Assistant Professor of Meteorology, Rachel Humphrey from SCSU. There was a lot that we covered today, and there are a bunch of links for you in the show notes that take you to the events that we covered, some of the historical data that we talked about. Make sure to check those show notes each week so you can keep learning after you're done listening. Join the discussion on Twitter. You can find us at the handle @MinCentral. That's @MINN Central. Like what you've heard so far? Tell a friend. We want to reach the community, young and old alike. So tell your grandparents, tell your grandchildren, and surprise a Gen Xer by remembering to tell them too. This episode was developed and managed by Eve and Gary Wallinga. Production by me, Teresa Meese. Music provided by Epidemic Sound. Contact us with your questions and comments at mincentralcurrents@gmail.com. That's MINN Central Currents with an S @gmail.com. You can find us on your favorite podcast app by searching our name, Min Central Currents. And remember to click subscribe or follow. Till next week.